Welcome, first-time listeners and returners to the Sports Deli, where thoughtful conversations and insightful guests are always tops on the menu. Join Dr. J and myself, Hootie Hoot, as we continue our discussion on contemporary social, educational, and sport issues. If you want to send us an email, feel free to do so at thesportsdeli@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at Mike Hootner or on Twitter at Michael Hootner. Now grab your favorite bagel or deli sandwich and favorite beverage, and let's do this together in the Sports Deli. Well, we're joined by legendary coach Mike Jarvis. You can find him at coachmikejarvis.com, on Instagram at Coach Mike Jarvis, on Twitter at Coach Mike Jarvis. Now you're teaching a leadership class. Talk a little bit about that and what that means to you after all these years, the 7 C's of leadership.
Well, I tell you what it means is, first of all, it means I'm still alive. And it means that, the lessons, good, bad, and indifferent, that I've learned over the years from, so many incredible people, I'm now able to share. And, whether it's a young man or a young woman or an older man or older woman who's taken the course, and whether they played sports or not, when you dig deep, you realize that, no matter what it is, everything is connected, and it all goes back to, the C's that I talk about in my book and in my course.
Have you had any coaches or former players take your class?
You know what? I haven't yet.
Coach, you talk about communication.
Yes.
And I was curious, you've been a teacher for years, and how has communication changed now? And the young people's understanding the importance of it. Like, I'll use an example. If Hoot and I, we're about the same age. I'm 49, he's 50. If we were communicating and we wanted to go do something, we would call each other and we'd make a plan and we would talk and we'd verbalize. Are you going to call so-and-so? I'm going to call so-and-so. Nowadays with social media, how does that change how people think of communicating, good and bad, of what they're saying and how they're in the tenor and tone they can come across, even if it's unintentional?
Yeah, well, because of the fact that we don't communicate verbally with one another, and very seldom are we looking the other person right in the eye. Very seldom can we sort of feel what they're feeling by just being with them.
You are listening to an interview with Mike Jarvis, former head men's basketball coach at Florida Atlantic University, St. John's University, George Washington University, and Boston University. Coach Jarvis won a state championship in high school. He played 3 sports: baseball, basketball, and football. And after winning the state championship in the Boston Garden, which is how they did it back then, being from Cambridge, Massachusetts, they rode around the city on a fire truck after midnight, celebrating their state championship. Now, back to the Sports Deli's interview with Mike Jarvis, and he now talks about some of his mentors when he first started getting into the business of coaching. I was watching today the ESPN's Women's and Sports Summit, and it was very fascinating to listen to a lot of the things that they were saying and tied into what you're talking about in terms of leadership. And you were mentored by some very historic people, Red Auerbach from the Boston Celtics, and you had talked about in a couple of different instances you had gaps in your career. After Harvard, you had a gap, and then you had a gap after St. John's, and you talked about how difficult that was. And one of the things they talked about today was so often we are guided by things that are outside of us.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm curious, how do you help people find, everyone has a voice. How do you help them fine tune that voice, that inner voice, so that they truly follow their calling? And talk maybe a little bit about your mentors and how they helped you do that when you were first starting out in the business, because it was very different back then as a young African-American male, out of Cambridge, which was very different.
Yes, it was. And yet I was blessed. I had my mentors, what they were was, they were great teachers. And, like, for example, my college coach, Dick Dukeshire, who went on to actually start, really was the guy that started to develop basketball in Greece. He was Greek, and he went over to Greece and he started to develop the basketball programs there. And so, I mean, I studied him not just as a basketball coach, but really as a teacher, where he would position himself as it related to the team. Um, when he would, when he would communicate, how long he would communicate. And, I picked up a lot of good things from him. I also picked up some things that weren't so good. For example, I, like him, too often talked too long. I spent too much time, maybe at the wrong time trying to teach. In other words, I sort of wish that he had taught me that sometimes the best thing to do is just keep quiet and wait till the next day before you start correcting and teaching. And that's one thing that if I, were to coach again, I would do a lot differently. I mean, I think I could be a lot more patient with my words, and I could be a lot more thoughtful with my words, and really try to think about, certain words and the impact that they have on kids, especially today, because kids today, I think, they're nowhere near as tough. They don't. Words, I think, can really knock them for a loop for a long time. We would get knocked down, but I think we got back up a lot quicker than the kids today.
You left the team for a while, and if it wasn't for your brother and Coach
You've done your homework.
you wouldn't have been back on the team. So he was very forgiving, even though he was tough.
Well, it's yes, he was tough, and I made the mistake that many young kids today make. In other words, I blamed him for my lack of playing time. I had really good talent. I was a tough, little point guard from Cambridge, and we had great teams and we won. But we won mainly because we were just better, more physically better than everybody, not because we were a better team. So when I went to college, my lack of fundamentals really came out, and it affected my playing time. But I didn't realize that, so I quit the team. And thanks to my brothers, keeping after me, I went back and asked for a second chance. I was fortunate that I had people in my life that when I messed up, they would give me a second chance. I mean, I had a lot of second chances, thank goodness. Otherwise, I wouldn't have, I don't think I'd be sitting here talking with you today if he didn't give me another chance to come back and be on the team. Now, he didn't play me very much even after that, but that's when I decided I wanted to become a coach and started to, develop my coaching notebook and really, gear my life towards coaching and teaching.
Coach, in the 80s, you took over the BU, Boston University program, and I'm curious, as a young African American in a city that's not known for being overly progressive, Bill Russell's talked about that. What was your experience like? In particular, how much did you benefit by being from Boston and Cambridge in that area in preparation for that, comparatively to if someone else that was African American had come from outside and tried to take the program on?
Well, I think if somebody else had come in from outside, outsiders, when they came to Boston, were intimidated most of the time. They allowed, the city, structure of the city, the racism that existed to basically control their lives and where they went and what they did. I didn't know any better. I was born and raised in Cambridge, and even though it was right across the river, I mean, what separated Cambridge from Boston was the Charles River. And, Cambridge was a lot more liberal, forgiving city. And, you could go anywhere in the city and be known by any part of the city. You'd know them, they know you. You didn't have to worry about, being called all kinds of names and being run out of the neighborhood. So I didn't know any better, and probably that was to my advantage. So when I went to BU, I wasn't intimidated by being in Boston and being in a, pretty much a white Irish Catholic dominated environment, because I myself was educated and raised by Irish Catholics in Boston. So, I knew my way around the city. People knew me, and I never really felt, like I was an outsider, where I think most blacks that came into Boston did. I always felt that that was my home. I belonged there. And, you weren't telling me where I could go and what I could do. I was going to go where I needed to go and wanted to go. And then having people like Red Auerbach, Satch Sanders, who introduced me to Red Auerbach. Satch was, one of the great Celtics players. He wore number 16. His number hangs in the rafters. And I was able to get a job over at Harvard. When I left Northeastern, I went to Harvard to work with Satch. And then that opened up some doors with people like Red Auerbach. So, I tell you what, when you talk about, the people that God puts into your life and that can make things happen for you without you knowing it, I was really blessed.
So you talk about Red Auerbach, Satch. We'll jump forward in a minute. When Satch left, you thought you were going to get that Harvard job, and that was a tough pill to swallow for you. But before that, you worked at Northeastern as an assistant for Jim Calhoun, who later on went to Connecticut, and obviously, we know the rest of that story. How was it working for Calhoun?
Well, we even when we worked together, we competed. We still competed against one another. In those days, you had freshman teams and JV teams, and every day we would scrimmage. So even when I was on the same team with Jim, I was competing with Jim. Then we continued to compete against one another when I was at Harvard, and then we continued to compete against one another when I was at BU, when he was at Northeastern, and then Connecticut, and then the rivalry continued when I went to St. John's. I think he probably thought I was just following him around so I could coach against him. But we had wars. All from playing and from college. The only time we didn't compete against each other was in high school. But other than that, it was game on all the time with Jim, and great coach. And I'm really grateful. I'm really glad that he decided that he wanted to keep me on his staff and that I could, stay in the game, because once again, if that didn't happen, then I probably wouldn't have gone to Harvard, and then I wouldn't have gone to BU. So, one job always seemed to lead to the next one. And I was very grateful for that,
So in between those stops, you thought you were going to get the Harvard job, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes, I should have.
You should have. And then, so there was a gap, but you learned some things. You started a program for youth, which ended up being very beneficial for you later. Obviously, you coach Patrick Ewing. A lot of people know that.
That had a little bit to do with my
that had a little bit to do
ascension.
with it.
Yeah.
But what people don't know is that you started the Shoot Straight youth program, and you wanted to give back to kids. Obviously, it was something that you were passionate about. The future generations, and one of the players in that program was Ramil Robinson, who ended up obviously going to Michigan, won a national championship in Michigan in 1989. And talk a little bit about, he was drafted in the NBA. Talk about that program, how that helped you cope, maybe in the same way that between St. John's and Florida Atlantic, how difficult those years were for you in between jobs, and what that did for you.
Well, I tell you what, we started the Shoot Straight was a co-ed youth basketball program. I had seen and witnessed the success of biddy basketball in the Midwest, in Indiana and Ohio and those places. So we started a youth program. My kids were young, and my son was playing ice hockey. Mike was playing ice hockey, and they had to get up at 5:30 in the morning to go to practice. So I said, we can't have that week. So I started a basketball program, probably just so I wouldn't have to get up and go to an hockey rink in the morning. And so we started the Shoot Straight program. I started it with a friend, associate, a teaching fellow by the name of Joe Colanino. And it just really developed into a really special program. It became our feeder program in Cambridge. It was for boys and girls starting basketball in the third grade. We made our own biddy basketballs. We played on 8.5 foot hoops. We used a game, adapted a game from my teaching days in phys ed sideline basketball, so every youngster played the same amount of time. And, so our whole program was developed from the third grade up. So by the time kids got to high school, they had already been in my basketball program, some of them for 4 to 5 years. And they certainly had the fundamentals down. And that's where a lot of our players, in fact, all of our players came out of the Shoot Straight program. And we didn't let the parents coach. Our high school players were the coaches. So they would practice and then they would teach. They would teach the younger kids, and they were the role models and the leaders for the young kids in the community. So they became sort of like the heroes in the community, the role models, the teachers, the coaches. And the program just perpetuated itself and kept us basically one step ahead of our rivals for a long time. And in fact, the program is still being run. It's being run by one of my former players. In fact, there were I think we had 3 freshmen that started at the high school. Patrick Ewing was one, Ramil Robinson, and then a young man by the name of Lance Doughton, who went to Michigan on a football scholarship. I tried to recruit him to BU to play basketball, but he went to Michigan, was a defensive back. And so Lance is now a teacher. In fact, he's coaching at the high school. He's won some state championships as the high school coach, and he still runs the Shoot Straight program, and that still serves as the feeder program in Cambridge. But and it was co-ed, so we staggered it so that the girls were a little bit older than the boys, and they could compete the same level with the younger boys, and it was quite successful.
More than
Coach,
30. That's amazing.
Coach, you coached Patrick Ewing. Another big man you coached was at GW was Yinka Dare. And I was wondering if you could talk about, and obviously, unfortunately, he's passed away since. But can you talk about what made him special at GW? Obviously, a unique player, but why didn't he make it in the NBA at a time where he was a first-round draft pick? From that standpoint, what do you think was it that he didn't make it through? Because it appeared he had all the skill sets.
Well, he didn't have the skill sets. He had the size. He had the strength. His go-to shot was a dunk, and the gym would shake when he dunked. But he was so strong. It's funny when my assistant coach Ed Myers, he went to Nigeria. Went over to Africa to a tournament. Saw Yinka, and he called me up and said, "Coach, I saw this kid." He said, "What a physical specimen!" But the kid, he can't play, but more than a couple of minutes before he's winded and he has to take himself out. So, one of my former players was an assistant coach now at Boston College. Scott Spinelli was coaching at Milford Academy, and I called Scott up and said, "Scott, I got this kid I want to recommend to your school." Told him his name, Yinka Dare, and he met Yinka. He immediately offered him a scholarship. Yinka went to Milford Academy on a scholarship. And I remember going up to see Yinka and saying, "Listen, I don't know. There's obviously something physically wrong with you because you should be able to play more than 2 minutes without having to come out and lie down." So I told him, I promised him, I says, "You know what, if you have a problem," he thought he had a heart problem. And I says, "The first thing we'll do when you come to GW is I'm going to have you examined, and we're going to find out what the problem is." And I says, "If it's something that will prevent you from playing," I said, "you're still going to have a scholarship, so don't worry about that." And so he came to GW. I took him over to Georgetown, to the doctors over there. They examined him, come to find out he had asthma. And, with a little inhaler, taking a couple of puffs, he went from a kid that couldn't play 2 minutes to a kid that could go through a 3-hour practice.
Wow.
And what he didn't have when he first started was a lot of skill. He had a lot of power. He had, just raw athletic ability and a great desire. But, he wasn't ready for the NBA when he left. And so he never really developed into a really, an NBA player because you got to have more than just strength. And he was about 6'10", even though we listed him as 7 feet. But he was 6'10", and he wasn't quite big enough to be able to play the way, with his skill set, the way that he probably would have had to play. but he, and then he had some problems with his knees. He had got some bad advice, and they operated on both knees at the same time. So that really killed. I mean, he was done athletically.
Wow.
And then I think what happened was just when he was starting to get back in shape to maybe try to make another run at it, he died of a heart attack. Great kid. And he helped put GW on the map. Make no mistake about it.
You are listening to an interview with Mike Jarvis, former head men's basketball coach at George Washington University, Boston University, St. John's University, and Florida Atlantic University. Mike went to the first game that Bill Russell ever played at the Boston Garden versus the Philadelphia Warriors. And he went with his brother, who always looked out for him, helped him get a second opportunity at Northeastern when he quit the basketball team as a sophomore. And his brother made him go and apologize to his college coach. And from there, he was able to graduate with a degree in physical education and started his coaching career. Now back to the interview with Mike Jarvis and the Sports Deli. I know you've talked about Patrick Ewing a lot. Obviously,
Of course.
he trusted you in his younger years. But I want to ask you. I know he had COVID and he's doing well now. How proud are you of him and his ascent? And Patrick Ewing had that stigma for years. He couldn't get a job, and he's doing a really good job at Georgetown.
He is.
Talk about how proud you are of him and what he's doing and what he means to follow. Obviously there's a couple people. We had Craig Esherick on, and but to really follow in his mentor's footsteps, Big John.
Well, Patrick was always. I mean, John used to refer to Patrick as a warrior, which he was. Patrick's, main goal whenever he competed was to win. Didn't care how many points he got. He sometime, I think, was proud of the amount of rebounds and block shots than he was points, but he wanted to win. That's the only thing he cared about was winning. And during his high school days, he helped us win a lot of games in a lot of different ways. One night, I remember, in fact, I think it might have been the first time that John Thompson saw him play. John was sitting with Red Auerbach in the Boston Garden, and we were playing against Boston Latin High School, and they had an All-American by the name of Paul Little, who went to Penn. And, there was one of those games that came down to the last couple of minutes, and Paul Little drove the left baseline. I can see it like it was yesterday. And Patrick, left the post, went down, put his foot out of bounds, bent his knees, took the offensive foul, and Paul fouled out. We went on to win, and that propelled us to our first state championship. During the time that, Patrick played for me in high school, we lost one game. We were 77-1. We won 3 consecutive state championships. And the only team we lost to was the state champs of Connecticut, Wilbur Cross, and on their home court. And in fact, the next year we beat them at Boston U in a rematch. But Patrick was a winner. Always was a winner. And he was always a student of the game. He didn't say a lot, but you talk about communication, being not just the ability to talk, but the ability to listen and understand. And he was a great listener, and he really understood what not only he was supposed to do, but what everybody else on the court was supposed to do. So he would be the first one to put his hand up and say, "Hey, coach, would you repeat that?" And, he's always at the front of the class, right at the front. And, if you needed somebody to demonstrate, or you need somebody to help you, he was always ready to do so. And, and he's doing a great job at Georgetown. It's a little different. They can't get all the players they used to get, but he's starting to get some guys. And I think as he gets better players, his teams will continue to get better. He works his butt off. I've been at a couple of his practices, and I see how hard he works as a coach, just like he did as a player. He's probably got to just tone it down a little bit himself, be a little bit little bit kinder and sweeter. Look who's talking, right? To the players. But he's a tough guy. I mean, if you go play with him, boy, you better be ready to go to work, and you better work every second, because that's what he expects. He expects the same out of you that he expects and gives himself.
How do you think he's handling just everything that's going on now? The social injustice, um, COVID, and how would you, if you were back in coaching, how would you handle it? It's very sensitive in certain respects, and players have social media, and they want to make sure that they're heard. And talk a little bit about where we're at as a country, and if you were a coach, how you would be handling that kind of situation.
Well, I think the first thing I'd want to make sure that everybody understood was that how blessed they were to be in the United States of America, how they were in the greatest country in the world, how America, and folks in it, no one's perfect. Our country isn't perfect, but it's still the greatest country that God ever created. And I'd want them to really embrace that first and foremost, and be proud of being an American, and being proud of, where we've come. And then I'd try to make sure that they understood what was, as much about what was going on and what was behind the different movements. A lot of people, really have no understanding of, what Black Lives Matter is, what Antifa is. I mean, what the goals and objectives, what the platforms of some of these different organizations are. And then I think the thing I'd want to try to make sure the kids understood was, hey, if you don't like something, then try to make it better. Let's think about what we can do as a team, as a community, to make things better for the next group of kids, the next group that's coming along. So, I mean, that's what I would try to do. I'd try to get them to be as responsible, and try to figure out how we can try to make this a better world that we all live in. And in the meantime, be proud of the one that we are in and embrace it.
Have any of your players called you and said they're having a hard time with social injustice more than they ever have, or they're depressed? Depression and mental illness and mental health is, something that's being talked about more now. Is Ron Artest or anyone reached out to you, your former player at St. John's?
I've talked to some of my former players. I can't think of one player that's called me and said, and I really feel like, the world is collapsing on me. I think they know that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's going on, but there's a lot more that we can do to make it better. Yeah.
Coach, do you think in the recruiting process now, with everything going on, do you think that young people and their families will look into more the social situation on college campuses more than they might have in the past? And do you also think that maybe that we've seen Howard University get a big time recruit? Do you think there could be more of that with the HBCUs going forward, or is that a one and done type of situation?
Well, I'd like to hope that, any school that's trying to do it the right way would have success recruiting, whether it be a historically Black college or any place. But, let's face it, I mean, it's still about media, exposure, name, kids, let's face it, they wear champions shirts. They don't wear the teams that come in third and fourth. They usually put on I'm sure there's more Lakers shirts being worn right now than there are Detroit Pistons shirts.
That's right. Hey, watch it now.
Yeah, here you go. But
yeah, my bad boys in the background here. Come on now.
I hear you. I hear you.
It can be yours. It can be yours for 50 cents.
There you go.
Hey, I got some good stuff back there. Come on now.
Go. Speaking of 50 cents, he was just on TV the last couple of days.
Yeah, he was.
But it's really funny. I mean, I know that wherever I coached, we would go into homes and we would try to sell, the community that the kid would be coming into, and how we would try to make that community better and how they could help to make it better. And, the education that they would get and the support they would get. And you'd like to hope that maybe with everything that's going on today, people will realize that that's even more important than maybe they ever thought it was, to try and find the right community, the right coach, for their son or daughter to go to.
Don't you feel like you were ahead of your time in that way, where you were uh, taking into consideration a lot more than just coaching, whereas a lot of coaches for a long time, were just coaching, and they weren't doing a lot of the other things that you were, or Big John, or John Chaney, or Nolan Richardson, or any of these other coaches that looked at the whole person and took a more holistic approach.
Well, the difference, I think, with a lot of us, you mentioned some of the guys that I used to hang out with, that basically were the trailblazers for Black coaches. And most of those guys were like myself. They taught high school or junior high school and worked their way up to become a college coach. They didn't start out as assistant college coaches. So they were teachers. And they were part of that high school community. And I think they took a lot of that with them when they went to college. So it was a lot easier for a lot of those guys to look at coaching in a much more holistic way than maybe a lot of the young guys today that are coming along that, have grown up, and have maybe ascended into college coaching jobs without ever having really, had to mop or sweep a high school floor before practice. So it's a different world, it's a different game.
You're listening to an interview with Mike Jarvis, who took George Washington University to a Sweet 16 and St. John's University to an Elite 8. Now, back to the Sports Delis interview with Mike Jarvis.
Coach, you take St. John's to a high level, going to the Elite 8 and the Big East. I've had a debate with friends of mine. Is playing in the Garden an advantage or disadvantage comparatively to having an on-campus arena for St. John's in the recruiting? Because yes, you're playing in the Mecca, yada, yada, but it's not always packed and it's off campus, as opposed to like an experience that you see for UConn and other places that have smaller size arenas and it's on campus. If you were advising St. John's and someone came to you and they said, would putting an on-campus arena, a true arena, not Carnesecca Hall, be an advantage and help St. John's, what would you say?
I would say in most cases, I would agree that you'd probably be better off with the Cameron effect.
Right.
But I think that because it's New York, I think you still probably would want to try to take advantage of the glit and the glamour of Madison Square Garden. You just would have to do a better job at selling it and trying to fill it. New York's a different animal.
Can you talk about that? I mean, how is it that New York City really has not had a winning college basketball program, since your time at St. John's at a high level, and yet the amount of talent there year in and year out is still very strong?
It's strong, but you got to realize that, when kids think about going to college, most of the time that's equated with going away to school. So the majority of the kids in New York are not going to go to school in New York. And, when I first went to St. John's, the biggest advantage that we had was the fact that our players could lived at home, and they could get the stipend based on the cost of living. So they were able to live at home, get a good sized check every month that could help pay their parents' rent, help bring some food into the house, could help them get an automobile and have some pocket money. So they were able to live a pretty good life, at St. John's. And this was before dormitories. When they built the dorm, they took away the biggest advantage that we had. And I tried to explain that to some people. I don't think they still understand it. I mean, they wanted to be like Boston College and Villanova and have a campus and all that, but they didn't have the infrastructure around, there. So it actually hurt us. And a lot of the guys, when Lou Carnesecca, God bless him, I love him. He would go into a home on a recruiting visit. He would have a little paper napkin with him. And at the end of the recruiting visit, he'd pull out the napkin and he'd have the kid look at it, and the kid look at the napkin, and inside the napkin might be a number like 60,000, you know. And he'd say to the kid, well, if you come to St. John's, you know, that money could be yours. And the kid would look and say, what are you talking about? He'd say, well, that's, you know, you add up the room and board over a period of time, it's a lot of money. So a lot of kids, you know, went to St. John's because of that. And they had the ability, like I said, to live at home and have a pretty good, college life, you know, as opposed to many of us who went to school and never had a dime in our pocket. But,
Right.
you know, so we were better off. St. John's was better off without dormitories, you know, so our kids, I mean, because the amount of money kids would get, even if they wanted an apartment, would be based on the cost of living in the dormitory. And St. John's also made another mistake. They undercharged, you know, they made the dorms very reasonable. And that was great for the average kid coming to school, but it was bad for the basketball players. So anyhow.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's when we lost our advantage. And that was like, I think in I want to say my third year at St. John's, they, you know, and it was tough. It was tough when they built those dorms.
Interesting.
So, Coach, you've talked about how you didn't like the studio, but you liked being an analyst, you know, doing some color commentary, you know, when you were doing some announcing for a while there. And I always like to ask people that have transitioned into the booth, what coaches, when you were announcing games or in the studio, did you learn from, surprised by, and are proud of that you didn't really know about before you got into the booth? And what did you learn when you were in the booth?
Well, you know, one thing I learned was that there weren't any, I couldn't think of any bad coaches out there. I mean, they're all good coaches. And, you know, and what you learn when you're in the booth or behind, you know, you got the headset on and you're doing a game, is that there's a lot of different ways to be successful. And, you know, you might have thought, well, you had to do it this way or that way. But what you find out is guys do it a lot of different ways, and they have a lot of different styles doing it. And so I think my respect for coaches grew even more when I started doing games and I saw how different coaches were and how successful some guys were that, you know, you just didn't hear much about, you know, like, for example, and I go back to my days at St. John's, for example, and, you know, I think of, you know, obviously you got Jim Calhoun and you know, you had, before the Calhoun, you know, coaching days. I mean, you had the John Thompsons and the Rolly Massiminos and the Lou Carnesecas, and you had all these, I mean, just, you know, bigger than life coaches.
Didn't Raleigh think Patrick was going to go there, and he ended up going to Georgetown and then ended up beating him? Talk about irony.
Yeah, well, they beat them too. So
yeah,
for both of them. But you remember that game? But the almost perfect game that Villanova played. But you know, yeah, Patrick had narrowed his schools down to, I want to say, 6. You know, there were the 2 Boston schools, BC and BU. Patino was at BU. Dr. Tom Davis was at BC. Villanova had Rowley. John Thompson was at Georgetown. Larry Brown was at UCLA. Dean Smith at North Carolina. And I want to say those were the schools that Patrick was going to pick from. Not a bad group of schools. And, but I, you know, the guys that, you know, I used to love coaching against Calhoun, just like I loved coaching against John Calipari. I mean, you know, because those were the guys that you could get up for, you know, play it. I mean, you just wanted to coach against those guys. And when you beat them, I mean, it was such a great feeling.
With the spike going on nationally, 31 states seeing an uptick, how do you see college basketball being able to be played this year? And is it really, are we really going to have to look at a bubble for the big time schools and compare the difference that a Big East school will have to go through this year compared to like a place like BU is going to have to go through this year in an attempt to play?
Well, I think the bigger schools will have an easier time managing it for a lot of reasons. One is, you know, they've got, I mean, they'll have the budget. They could test their kids every day, some of them, if they had to. And if they go into a bubble situation, they'll be able to handle that financially a lot easier. The other thing is the big schools charter. They fly by private jets. So they're not going to be traveling through the airports, spending time in airports like the smaller schools, the poorer schools do. And I think it's those are the situations where the young people and older people are probably most susceptible to getting sick. In those in the airport, on the maybe on the commercial plane. So it's going to be very difficult. I don't, I mean, and there are some conferences, the minute one kid gets sick, the whole conference is liable to close down, and that there'll be other conferences, the bigger conferences, they're going to try to make it happen because it means a lot in revenue, a lot in exposure. So it's going to be it's going to be very interesting to see how this season plays out.
Did you watch any of the NBA games?
I did.
What did you think of the bubble?
Well, I'll tell you what, it worked out great. I mean, I thought that, it sort of like evened the playing field a lot for a lot of different teams. And I think the teams that normally would not, I mean, I think some teams did better than they probably would have normally because they didn't have to, get on a plane and didn't have to play in the home game. So, there's no huge advantage for anybody in terms of the home court, and I think back to the days of the Boston Celtics when Red Auerbach was coaching and the Lakers would come in and he'd put them in a little small overheated locker room.
100 degrees.
110 degrees, 10 showers, cold showers, nails in the wall where you hang up your clothes. I mean, of course, they don't have any locker rooms like that anymore, but there's still a huge difference between the home teams and the visiting bubble, where they played the games at Disney. Everybody pretty much had the same facilities and obviously the same court for every game.
Definitely.
So I enjoyed it, and I was really happy to see Miami and Boston. And Miami go as far as they did because I think Eric Spoelstra's, he's as good a coach as there is in the game, and that Miami team, that Miami program franchise, boy, I tell you what, they know how to put a team together. I think he put a super team together. And I was sort of hoping that they'd win it all, and that, I could say, the best team won, not necessarily the best players. And, but at the end of the day, talent many times will overcome,
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jimmy Butler, brought back the mid-range game. That was fun to watch.
It was,
yeah.
and for an old-time coach like myself, a lot of fun to watch. That's the way the game used to be played. Get the three-point play the old-fashioned way, the hard way. Take it to the hoop.
You're listening to an interview with Mike Jarvis, who coached Patrick Ewing in high school. Interesting story about Patrick. He was sick during his junior year in a high school game in Connecticut where they were playing the defending state champs. And he was so ill that he kept sweating through multiple T-shirts that he put on under his jersey, but he liked how it felt, so he continued to wear the T-shirt under his uniform. And when he went to Georgetown to play for John Thompson, Coach Thompson allowed it, and he even went to Nike and asked Nike to brand it, and this began the T-shirt under the jersey craze for over a decade. Chris Mullin from St. John's wore it, as well as many other players. Now back to the final segment of the interview with Mike Jarvis, former head men's basketball coach at Boston University, George Washington University, St. John's University, and Florida Atlantic University in the Sports Deli. We're gonna ask you a few fun questions, and then we'll give you the stage. Talk about anything else that you want to talk about, your other books or anything else, and then we'll have some parting words for you.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. Quick answers. 45s or 8-track tapes?
45s.
Yes, they're still relevant.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. So now you've gotten to know John and I a little bit. I usually ask this question at the end, but I'm going to ask it now. Okay.
Who's the best looking between you and John?
No, definitely not.
We
I
know
know I was
that.
We know that, right, John? It's
Exactly.
you.
Exactly.
Okay.
There we
All
go,
right.
Nick.
Okay. So you had one scholarship or preferred walk-on spot available. Would you take
Yeah.
John or me?
Well, I haven't seen you practice, but I would say I probably would take you because you probably would be able to go through these my 3-hour practices better than John.
Absolutely.
All right. So as a kid, did you ride your bike to school or walk?
We walked everywhere, babe. But in Cambridge, everything was within walking distance. The community
true.
center, the ball field, the schools, you name it. The library, everything was within walking distance. So we walked everywhere.
Three Stooges or Lucy?
Three Stooges.
Wow.
Gilligan's Island or the Munsters?
I'd have to say Gilligan's Island.
There you go. The Honeymooners or Leave It to Beaver?
Oh, you know what? That's a tough one. Jeez, I watched both shows. I mean, those are the shows that I grew up on.
Right.
But I would say
Jackie Gleason.
Jackie Gleason. Yeah. Okay, I'd send you to the moon. The Honeymooners.
All right. Watermelon or grapes?
Both.
All right. Vacuuming, you've been married a long time. Vacuuming or dishes?
Well, I've done the dishes for 53 years now. That's how long I've been married.
Wow.
I made a deal with my wife. If the dinner's good, I'll do the dishes. I shouldn't have never said that because I've been doing dishes for 53 years now.
Talk about that for a second. What's the secret to your success? You've talked in the past about her words of wisdom when you were in between jobs, and nowadays it's just different. How has it been sustained for so long? That's just remarkable.
Well, you know what? It's all her. Trust me. I don't know how she did it, but I would tell my players, number one, try to find not only somebody that's good looking, but try to make sure they can cook because there's many a night, baby. If you get a good meal, that's probably all you're going to get. So make sure you got a woman that can cook, but most of all, make sure you get a wife who wants to become your partner in life and wants to basically be a part of your team, maybe become your team's psychologist and yours as well. But somebody that's going to invest their life and become a part of yours.
Amazing. Drive-in movie theater or Netflix?
I used to love the drive-in movie theaters. It's tough. We had a lot of good times at the drive-ins.
Totally. Candy or popcorn at the movies?
Popcorn. No butter.
No
what?
butter.
Oh, that's
funny. No butter. just some good hot popcorn. A little bit of salt.
Real quick, Coach, we were talking about this with someone else. In Boston, I think it is, and New York, the movie theaters, they can't have shows. They've been selling the popcorn and people have been lining up on the streets to buy $20 popcorns to take home.
Well, in those cities, people are nuts. You know that. So nothing would surprise me. I'm surprised they don't have a brown paper bag with some
That's right.
cheap wine in it to go with the popcorn.
Larry Bird or Magic Johnson?
Well, come on now. I mean, I'm going to take Larry, even though, if I was, in terms of to coach, I probably would take Magic because he was that much more versatile. But hey, Larry Bird. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you a Larry Bird story. Larry Bird, one day I was in my office at BU and I got a phone call and the person said, "Hey, coach, this is Larry." I said, "Larry who?" He said, "Larry Bird." He says, I've been hurt. I said, "Yeah, I've been coming over to the Garden. I really miss watching you play." And he says, "Well, I'm getting ready to start playing again." And he says, I was calling to see if you'd allow me to come over to practice with your team. And he says, all I want to do is go through the fundamentals. I just want to go through the drills. And so could you imagine one of the greatest players who ever walked the face of the earth? He wanted to do the drills. And I was so excited and I made a mistake. I told my athletic director, and he said, they can't have them. It's illegal. I should have just went ahead and had Larry Bird come in and then pleaded the fifth afterwards, said, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But
Right.
imagine having
Wow.
Larry Bird come
Wow.
in and go through
Wow.
the drills with your players. He didn't want to scrimmage. He just wanted to do the drills.
What a great
Wow.
story. Well, him and Kobe are renowned for being fanatical about fundamentals in their footwork.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more. All right, so there's 7 seconds left. You're up 3. Other team has the ball. You foul or let them shoot?
Well, when I was coaching, I would play defense, figuring we could stop anybody at any time. Nowadays, I think I would practice the foul. Try to really teach my kids when, where, and how to foul.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, anything else that you want to share about your books, about anything else that maybe we didn't touch on?
Well, you know what I really want to say is this. I mean, I wish I could. I would love to think that if I said to you, if anybody wants to get any of my books, they can just go to coachmikejarvis.com, which they could. I'm not going to sell many books that way, but I will say this: that if anybody wants my book, go to Coach Mike Jarvis. And if anybody wants to have somebody who coached and taught for over, I guess about 40 years come and give a talk, whether it be live or virtual, could be on the game, it could be on life, it could be on leadership, could be on life skills. Hey, I'm ready. And if anybody's looking for a coach, I always thought that I would coach until I was 90, and I think I would have if my AD was a little smarter than he was, because I should still be coaching, to be honest with you. But I'm enjoying. But I'm glad to be alive, and I would love to coach again. Maybe I'll get a high school job in the next year or two. And
Isn't Mike Jr. coach in high school?
No, well, he's got a prep school.
Prep school, yeah,
in Connecticut.
Connecticut, yeah.
Because back in the day after camp, we used to hang out with him.
Yeah, well, he is one of the greatest guys. And, he was my assistant coach at the age of 12 when I coached the McDonald's All-American game. And we had Michael Jordan. And I was able to pick my assistant. And when I told the guy, I got my assistant, you'll meet him when we get off the plane. And when we got off the plane, the guy would say, well, where's your assistant? I says, he's right here. I says, my son. And
so, Coach, tell us about how your son's doing at Green Farms Academy.
He is, let me tell you, he is doing fantastic. Number one, he's a great teacher, great coach. He loves the game, loves the kids, and they're really fortunate to have him. I'm sure they're winning a lot more games than they ever have won, playing different than they've ever played. He's firing up a ton of threes, still playing man-to-man defense. So he's doing great. He should be coaching at a big-time Division I school. I mean, he's really.
He coached with Coach K. He's had some great jobs.
Oh yeah, his biggest problem was that he was my son, and he never ever got the credit that he should have got and would have got. And if I had to do that all over again, I would have probably traded sons with another coach at another school. Said, you take my son, you take him off to Michigan, I'll take your son with me. And at the end of the day, I think Mike would be coaching right now at a big time Division I school, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Well, if he hadn't gone down the bench and told Adrian Branch, you better start playing some defense in the McDonald's All-American game, you probably wouldn't have won that game at 12 years old. What a
Probably
great story
not.
that is.
Probably not. He, he says, hey, Dad, he's not playing any defense. I said, what are you talking about? He says, Adrian, he's not playing defense. So I said, you're right. So we took him out. Adrian went down, stomping down the end of the bench. Mike got up out of his chair, went down, looked Adrian in the eye and said, Adrian, if you don't play defense, my dad ain't going to put you back in. Adrian sat back up. 2 or 3 minutes later, Mike hit me with an elbow and said, hey, Dad, let's give Adrian another shot. Put him back in. He played his butt off. In fact, he was the MVP, even though Mike should have won it, Mike Jordan. Right. But Adrian was the MVP of the game. We won 96-95 over a very talented West team. And
a quick story on that.
Yeah.
You know, Michael Jordan's known for holding grudges. And
Yes.
if you go back and watch the 1984 North Carolina Maryland game with true story, with 8 seconds left, if the dunk that he became known for was the first time he pulled it out at Cole Fieldhouse. And the story in the locker room is that's what Cole Fieldhouse gets for not giving me for giving it to Adrian Branch and not me for the McDonald's All-American. That's why he dunked that way.
I did an article with a writer from Wichita who told me that story, and if he didn't tell me that, I wouldn't have never known it. This would have been the first time I ever heard that story. But
the other one was Billy Packer told the story, because Billy Packer was at that game, and Michael Jordan's mother was going ballistic in the stands, yelling at the people who chose, like yelling. And Billy Packer had to go up to her. He goes, "Mrs. Jordan, your son is going to have a lot of great things coming his way. Don't worry about this." And she goes, "He should have been the MVP. They took it from him. They took it from him." You know,
and she was right. But you know, it's funny that after that game, we had a dinner, and we were all in the elevator, and going up the elevator was Packer and Mrs. Jordan and Mr. Jordan. And she says to me, she says, "Oh, my poor boy, my poor Michael. He never gets any recognition. The poor kid always gets the short end." And I'm saying, so years later, I would say, "Oh, he really got the short end." But that was fun. Those were the things that really motivated Mike, to be honest with you. You know, and you're right. I mean, he hated to lose. And I guess from very reliable sources, he never forgot. So, you know, hey, it is interesting. It's interesting what makes us tick, isn't it? Huh?
Totally.
It is, definitely.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
Mike, we appreciate your time. I don't think you get enough credit for what you've done for college basketball. There was only 16 African-American coaches when you started your career as a head coach, and 8 of those were at historical Black colleges. So to be one of 8 at that time, you know, it's just a remarkable thing. And I applaud you for how you always handled yourself, whether it was at summer camps when we were there with you, or as a head coach, and, you know, how you handled the in-between jobs and the media. You know, you were a class act all the way, and it's been really fun and an honor. And like I said, I don't think you get enough credit.
Well, I thank you. I really, you know, and you know, when we went to Wichita to play in that McDonald's game, I remember one of the Texans, one of the guys there, a guy from Texas took us out. He bought us all these cowboy hats, you know, and he says, "You know, Coach," he says, "it's really hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way." And he says, "But I want you to have this hat." And I never forget, I wore that hat. And, you know, and humility it's tough. And so I appreciate you saying that. And I know you wouldn't say it if you didn't mean it. And I accept it with respect and humility. And I just thank God for giving me the opportunity that he gave me. And like I said, if I, you know, hey, who knows? I mean, I might make a comeback at when I'm 85. You know, somebody will say, I want to hire that guy. He'll be my assistant." And
there you go.
We'll see. I was hoping to be Mike's assistant. That was the way I wanted to end my story, working as my son's assistant coach. But that wasn't God's plan. So hey, that happens. Man plans, God laughs.
Exactly.
I said it's been a pleasure being on with you guys. If ever you want to do a rerun or do this again, please let me know. It's been a lot of fun. I love going back in time, and I got a million stories. So we could talk for hours and hours and hours, as you can tell.
Leave us with one last good story, whether it's in a deli or with Coach Beaton or anything else that you want to share.
Well, let me tell you. Let me give you this story. I told you I was fortunate. I got a job to work with Sat Sanders, Celtic great guy I used to go and watch play. And my brother-in-law and he were friends. So my brother-in-law called me up and says, "Hey, how would you like to work with Sat Sanders over at Harvard?" Well, I was teaching at the high school. So from the high school to Harvard was like a 10-minute walk. I said, "I'd love it." So he says, well, I'm going to give you Satch's number. Give him a call, and maybe you could talk to him about the job. So I called Satch up. It was a Sunday afternoon. And I says, hey, this is Mike Jarvis. And I introduced myself, and I told him I was friend, it's who my brother-in-law was. He says, and I said, I'd love to talk to you about the assistant's job at Harvard. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just here. I'm at home. He says, well, come on over and we'll talk about it. And he lived over in Roxbury. So I borrowed my mom's car. I drove over. I got to his house. I knocked on the door, and he had his hat and coat on. He says, come with me. We're going to pick up my wife. She's an airline stewardess, flies for Delta. So we drove in his big old brown Cadillac from Roxbury over to the airport. We got over to pick up his wife to find out that the plane was delayed. So he said, we really haven't talked much about the job. Come on, we'll go back to the house. It was about 15 minutes. We'll go back and we'll talk, and then I'll come back and get it later. So we drive back to the house. We haven't talked about not 1 second about basketball, anything. And we get in the door. No sooner than we get in the door, the phone rings. His wife's plane had just landed. He said, come on, we're going to go back. So we go back. We pick up his wife. On the way home, he talks to his wife, the usual chit-chat stuff. We get back to the house. I walk up the stairs, ready to go in to talk about working with him. And he says, I'm tired. He says, I'm going to bed. I says, Mr. Sanders, I came over here to talk to you about working with you, the coaching job. I says, we haven't talked 1 second about basketball. He said, listen, I'm tired. I'm going to bed. You go home and do the same. I says, but what about the job? And as I was leaving, he says, don't worry. He says, you got the job. I just wanted to see if I liked you. And that was and so I got the job. Never talked once about basketball, nothing.
Amazing.
Oh, but
Funny.
he said, he knew all about me. He knew about me as a basketball coach. He just wanted to see if he could hang with me,
That's right.
Right.
We spent a lot of time together.
That's great.
That's awesome.
In fact, I'm going to call. I got to call him tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, say hi to Mike Jr. and
I will.
Stay safe and enjoy the college basketball season. And we'll hook up soon again down the road.
You know what? And the next time we do meet, we'll talk a little bit about GW and about Scotty Beaton, and because Scotty set the wheels in motion at GW for the European international connection, where we got Alexander Kul and Yegor Misharikov, and we went to Serbia, and we went to Poland, we went to Lithuania. We were among the first coaches that recruited internationally, and Scotty was the guy that made the connections and really, help us recruit internationally. And once we started getting kids from overseas, it was a lot easier to get more. So I want to give a shout out to Scotty.
Definitely.
Okay. Sure. And just let him know how much I appreciate what he did for us.
Yeah. Well, you put GW on the map, like you said, in large part because of that, the international recruiting that you guys did. It was fun to watch. Those were some fun years.
He also said you could make some good recommendations on delis around the country.
Oh yeah, make no mistake about it. Good, corned beef and and hot pastrami and you name it. In fact, my wife and I were talking about in the years ago when we used to go to New York, how we couldn't wait to get to Carnegie Deli.
Oh yeah,
and and have those humongous sandwiches and everything else that went with it. But nothing like a good Jewish deli,
Absolutely not.
Nothing.
And I got hooked on the matzo ball soup with chicken noodle and matzo ball, and man, so I'm good. I'm good to go, baby. Yeah. All right, my friends.
All right, Mike. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Take care of yourself.
Michael, Jonathan.
Be well.
See ya. Be well, guys.
Mask up and vote. All right.
See ya. Amen.
Coach.
See you, buddy.
See ya.
I voted yesterday. See ya.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love it.
Can't tell you who I voted for because I get in trouble.
There you go. That's all right.
See ya.
All right, Coach.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Mike Jarvis for joining us in the Sports Deli. If you want to know more about his 3 books, you can go to CoachMikeJarvis.com. First book is called Skills for Life. It's a book about life skills. The second book is called Everybody Needs a Head Coach. And the last book we talked about earlier in the podcast, The 7 C's of Leadership. You can also follow him on Twitter and on Instagram at Coach Mike Jarvis. You can always send us an email to thesportsdeli@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at Mike Hootner or on Twitter at Michael Hootner. Until next time, for Dr. J, I'm Hootie Hoot. Thanks for joining us in the Sports Deli. Mask up and don't forget to vote. Go to www.vote.org. And remember, every vote matters. Black Lives Matter. Peace.